Hi everyone, welcome to my next lesson in Western Swing rhythm guitar. This is part of a series of lessons that are going to be here on YouTube that are examples of what my monthly membership lesson program looks like. In this upcoming year, we're going to be looking at all things Western Swing guitar, kind of switching back between Western Swing rhythm guitar in the style of Eldon Shamblin to different soloing concepts and signature licks from guys like Tiny Moore and Junior Bernard. What we've been doing from the last lesson is looking at the basic kind of chordal structure and theory of how Eldon Shamblin saw the fretboard and laid it out and then used that to create his wonderful rhythm passages. We've been working through just the key of D, going from a 1 to a 4 chord, going from D, D7 to G. And we're going to use this as a build-up to the first kind of simple Western Swing arrangement of Faded Love, but really taking the time to check out how all these chords interrelate, how the bass notes function, and how we can use them to walk down to the next chord, and so on and so forth. Now, I do have 2 courses out that are focused very in depth on Eldon Shamblin guitar. They cover kind of the basics, and then they move on to some of his signature licks and fills, and then give different arrangements of tunes, popular Western Swing tunes that he's done. So this is in kind of conjunction with that and is worth checking out, and there will be links in the description below, as well as links to register for my monthly lessons. So in this one, we're going to pick up where we left off. Last video, which will be attached in the description below here, we were talking about this chord shape right here. Right? I think it's like a C major open cowboy chord just moved up to D. And we talked about how we can use the bass to walk down to resolve into a G. Okay, so go check that out in the last video if you haven't seen it. Now we're going to move up to what is basically this open G chord. If we're going to finger it like this, where imagine an imaginary kind of open capo, if you will, or like a fret, we're going to move it all the way up to the 10th fret. And we've got now a D major chord. Now what we're going to spend most of the attention on is this triad right here. We have A, D, and F sharp, and then the bass notes that we can use with that. So if we're starting from here, and we have our bass note here as D, we've got D in the bass, C sharp in the bass, C in the bass, B in the bass, and if we keep going, A in the bass, right? So that's the 1, major 7, flat 7, 6, 5. Okay, so we wanted to set up kind of a parallel to that D7 change we did in the last lesson. We could go D, C, B, A, into G, just like that. Or we could come up to the higher G. Like so. Or right, we can kind of already see where all of these different G chords are that we can walk up to. Okay. Now, if we wanted to kind of start adding kind of a little more interest to the chord, instead of just going D, C, B, A to the change, we could go D, C sharp, that's the major 7, B, C, right? So we're going bass note and approaching it from below the note. And then we have the G right there, or as we'll talk in, I think, more of the monthly lessons here, we'll talk about this G chord right here. So you can have like so. Okay, so that's one way of just kind of approaching it, right? Right, that was me jumping down all the way to the A. There's not a hard, fast rule about having to be like a step away or a whole step away. You can make jumps and work your way up, because ultimately what you're trying to do is the last change between the chords, you're trying to make it where it is a close change. So even if I jump from D down to A, right, B, C, I'm still resolving down a half step there. Okay? Same if when we go like this. We're just resolving down a whole step. Okay? So that's the idea, right? So you can have some more variation on that. Now, let's start adding and exploring that area a little more. So if we've got this chord right here, we also have the F sharp on the 5th string. So we can start using the bass notes on the 5th string. So F sharp, D, right? C, B, G, or G, right? Or with the chromatic D, C sharp, C. And so on, right? We could throw in the E, so now we have F sharp, E, D, C, B. Sounds great. Or like so. So now you've got this great little D chord right up from our first D chord to use, okay? Now, as a side note, and this is a lick, or it's more of like a kind of a chordal movement that he uses often. I wouldn't call it quite a lick. But this is something I cover in the course quite a bit, is he'll do a thing where he'll combine both parts or both chord areas, right? Here and here. So if we're going to a G from a D7, he'll go like so, or another way to resolve it. Excuse me. Like so, right? With the B there. One more. That. And so what he's doing is he's taking this chord and just moving it down a whole step, which if we look at this, we don't need to overthink it too much. It's really just a D7. You've got an E, G, C, and E. And if you know a little bit, right, that's a C chord. But the C chord is acting as the flat 7 of D, as the flat 7 of D is C, right? So you don't have to overthink it too much. If you want, you could think of it like an A minor, D7, G, a 2-5-1, but I think that's even overthinking it. Just think if you've got a 7th chord, you can take that 7th chord shape just down a whole step and then resolve it into what it's supposed to go into, right? You could do it here, like this is a D chord, right? And you got it. This was a huge thing for me when I first discovered this, kind of unlocking it. Same with here, you could, D, C, G. We have a ton of songs that do that, right? That use the 1, flat 7 to the 4 chord. So that's a way to combine these shapes now. Okay, so now you've got two things to work with. We can start in this area and move down and get to G. We can start in this area. Right? And then we can combine the two. And just try different options. And you start just coming up with new ideas. So explore that kind of chord movement I just showed you, and then what we'll do in the next lesson is add one more component to it, and we'll talk about our chords all within this kind of chord shape here, which is kind of like, depending on what you learn first on the guitar, that could be like an open E chord if you imagine an imaginary kind of bar, or that F chord. So experiment around with that, and then we'll add up to kind of an arrangement here in the next 1 or 2 lessons. Thank you.